Okay, well, since we have such a wonderful panel here with us, I'll get into introductions so that people can file in as we're introducing, and people can, make sure the audio is working and everything's kind of set up the right way. I'm really personally excited about our discussion here this morning. This is a part of, sorry. I'm just sorry, I got a little note about this. This is our final installment, actually, of our July webinar series at the Ability Center. So this is the fourth installment. The first week in July, we had a webinar called ADA in Real Life, as we kicked off the month of July celebrating the 30th anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And ADA in Real Life was a really fun presentation from our very own Katie Hunt Thomas, where she kind of tailored and tweaked a little bit an ADA presentation that she's very familiar with. And we wanted to explore, a lot of people have heard about the ADA, but many people may not know the ins and outs and what it covers and how truly significant it is. And so that webinar was designed to cover what it looks like in real life. And she did a fantastic job on that. The next week, we had Dan Wilkins, our Director of Special Projects at the Ability Center. He hosted a conversation with his friend and disability rights kind of movement photographer, historian, Tom Olin. And they looked at various pictures that Tom has captured and reflected on those pictures and talked about the significance of those different moments that Tom was able to capture and share with the world. So that's a really great webinar as well. I encourage you to go back and check that out. And then last week, we had a really interesting conversation that we kind of referred to as the ADA generation. And this was a webinar conversation about what has the life experience essentially been like for different people with disabilities who I think most were born since the ADA has been passed, right? So many of our conversations are about history and about the advocacy that led up to that moment. But what about those young people who were born into a reality where the ADA was law? And that was a fascinating conversation, thinking about the way the conversation has changed and where it's headed and what their personal experience has been like. And so I encourage you to check out all of those. Today's is a little bit different, and we are simply asking the question, now that we're done kind of celebrating the ADA at 30 years, what if we took a minute and thought about what might we be celebrating when the ADA turns 50? So in 20 years from now, so in the year 2040, if anyone can even comprehend that is, a year we're moving toward sooner than we would like to admit. It's 2020 now. In the year 2040, when the ADA is 50 years old, what might we be celebrating? And so to do that, we assembled an all-star panel, as you can tell. And I'm going to introduce our panelists here quickly so we can get into the conversation. I joked with them before we started that it's going to be a challenge to cover the next 20 years in about 60 minutes, but I think that we can do it. We have the right panel in place to do so, so I'm excited to simply moderate the conversation. So first up, we have Renee Wood. Renee is a board member at the Ability Center and is also the chair of the Ohio Olmsted Task Force. So thank you for being here, Renee. Next, we have Katina Harding, who is the executive director of the Community Autism Program Development at the ProMedica Finnegan Family Autism Center. I hope I got that correct.
Helpful, yeah.
Wonderful. Then we have Katie Hunt Thomas, who I referred to earlier. She is our Director of Advocacy here at the Ability Center. We have Shannon Seger with the Northwest Ohio Deaf Services Center. Sorry about that, I just typed that in and lost my spot. Then we also have Stacey Butts, Executive Director of the Sight Center of Northwest Ohio. I hope I got all that right. If I did, let's get into the conversation. So let's just open this up and talk about the general premise here. As you think about the year 2040, when the ADA will be celebrating its 50th anniversary, what advancements in accessibility and inclusion do you think we might be celebrating? Who would like to start us off? All right, yeah, Shannon, please.
Shannon, please. Yes. Well, I was thinking, and what I envision, because everything is happening this year, I envision 20 years we're going to see a big improvement in technology. You know, we're still struggling with the internet right now, Wi-Fi, getting good connections, clear pictures, captioning, you know, speech to text, all of these things. I envision a big improvement, potentially even easier access to get interpreters when needing interpreters. Everything will be so much easier and simpler for people. Right now we rely on the technology. As a deaf and hard of hearing person, we really depend on technology. We have all along since the ADA passed, but it's slowly getting better. So now, since Corona, I think the next 20 years we'll definitely see a bigger improvement because of the reliance on technology during this time. And we'll have more access for people with hearing loss. We'll have real time, and we'll have many things. Everyone else, you know, will have real time access just like everyone else.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that you hit on the point about, you know, since Corona. I mean, Lisa Justice, who's kind of our tech wizard at the Ability Center and helps us set these up, even commented that we've gotten better at leveraging technology in this platform since we started doing these just a few months ago. And so I think that's a really excellent point. Who else would like to kind of reflect on that? Go 20 years out and think what we might be celebrating.
I'll go. I think 20 years out, I think what I think I'm excited about most is I think we're going to see a bigger sense of inclusivity by people, by the community at large. I think, you know, what we've seen over the past 30 years is, you know, the reason for needing these things in place, making sure that we're creating equal opportunities and accessibility for people. And I think it's understood why we needed to do that. But I think now we're getting to a point where really everybody is valuing diversity and inclusion and understanding the value that everybody brings, you know, to the community and to different aspects of life. And so I think, you know, 20 years out, what we're going to see is a lot more opportunities because people and companies want to, not because they have to. So I think we're already starting to see the shift in that kind of cultural paradigm there. But I think, you know, 20 years out, I think this next generation is really going to take it over the top for us.
That's great. Katie, what do you think?
I've given this some thought. I mean, there's a million answers to that question, Sam, and I think I'm really happy to be sitting on a panel, such a diverse panel that I think can speak from experience as to what they would like to see. You know, I think what I can bring as a disability rights attorney is kind of a focus on what I'd like to see happen with the ADA. The real focus for folks with disabilities that I've seen in the time I've been at the Ability Center has been pushing the most integrated setting appropriate provision of the ADA. In 1990, there was a Supreme Court decision that found that states and local governments did have to provide services in the most integrated setting appropriate, which is an ADA provision. And that meant that they actually had to have a plan to provide those. When in 2009, the last administration, we really saw a lot of that Olmstead enforcement happen. So it wasn't until Olmstead that we really saw states create plans to provide medical services in people's homes. And that's what's really allowed folks to be more independent. and to move away from the paradigm of institutionalization into community-based living. But that fight is still a fight. So there's still required to be Olmstead enforcement. Folks still aren't receiving all the services they need to remain independent. And right before kind of the picked up Olmstead enforcement ended, Olmstead was starting to be pushed into new settings. So not just healthcare, but employment. I think the next big push will be housing. So what I would like to see are more options available that allow people to live in integrated settings in the community, with healthcare in their homes, with all the supports they need to remain in the community, and then also integrated employment settings. And those are things that are starting to happen. There's also, I think Katina's right, there's a cultural shift going on. I think the ADA helped, and a lot of that legal enforcement started shifting culture as well. But that's still a fight, even 30 years later. So what I'd like to see, is increased enforcement of those provisions, so that more integrated employment, more integrated housing, more integrated healthcare options are available, in 20 years.
That's great. Renee, would you like to reflect on this question as well?
I think technology is going to play a huge part in the future. Everybody, almost, well, not everybody, but many people now have the Alexa in their homes, and I think you're going to see housing built with technology right inside of it, so everybody can use it. And I think that technology is going to make disability look a lot different. But I also think with medical advancements, as fast as they're going now, disability is not going to look the same 20 years from now as it does now. So we gotta start to grow with the changing of how disability looks. There will always be disabilities. That's not gonna go away. But I'm saying it's gonna look different. There are gonna be different kinds of needs that we don't even think of right now, because it changes. I also think as far as attitude about disability goes, people, because of the baby boomers won't be around anymore, the population will look a lot different, and we're going to need a lot more workers. So people with disabilities are going to be tapped into more as a resource for work. We're going to see a lot of changes, I think, I hope, in the future of employment. One more thing about we haven't talked about transportation yet, but I think with technology, transportation is going to be so much easier with autonomous vehicles. Can you imagine calling up a vehicle, it comes right to your house, automatically lets down the lift. You go in the vehicle, it folds up behind you, and it locks your wheelchair in place and takes you wherever you want to go. Now, I think that's what we're looking at for the future of transportation.
Well, I guess everyone, I think we should just wrap it up. I think Renee just covered it all, and I think we're good to go here. I'm kidding, but Renee, I loved your answers so much. I think I'm going to share a quick personal story. When my wife and I, our youngest daughter was born with spina bifida, and so she's 4.5. And I'll admit, when we were first thinking, when you're a parent, you think about your children, you think about what kind of world are they going to grow into, and I thought, I wonder what Joanna will think about when it comes to like the driver's license conversation. Like, will she even think about wanting to get her own vehicle, or will she just have, what will ride sharing look like? And will autonomous vehicles be at a place of saturation? And I don't know, but I wonder how much that same type of, I just think about the way transportation is going to change. I'm so glad you brought that point up. And the smart home, technology being built right into the physical build of a home. So interesting. This is, for the record, and Stacey, I'm going to call on you in a second. This is why I get so excited about this conversation, partially because I'm prone to want to look at the future and think about what things will be, but it's just an exciting thing to imagine and envision what might happen. So Stacey, what do you think? We're still on question number 1, everyone. So we'll get through this, I promise. What do you think,
I would
Stacey?
say, I love what Kate brought up, is that people now have the access to services that they did not have before, but I still feel there's a lot of movement in that. We have pockets of people that do not qualify for services under the state's model. So there's a lot that can be improved there. And I'm very excited to see that get better so that anyone that needs services to be independent can get it. But also transportation is huge. I love what Renee said, because we had a staff member here who was totally blind, and his dream was that he had his friends already picked out who would go in together to buy their driverless car, because paratransit is not fabulous, not here locally, and you can't go certain places. So they were all big users of Uber and Lyft, which is great, but that has so much room for improvement. It would be wonderful to be an area where you just knew you could get where you needed to go. And since almost everyone we serve can't drive, it's a large part of what we're always looking at.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We had a question slated to talk about what role might technology have to play, and I am just going to make the decision to scratch that one. I think we've really covered the technology question, but if you have more to add, Katie, you might have something to add on that.
Yeah, well, I love the transportation issue. When we look at a network of supports that allow folks with disabilities to be independent, it's such a crucial support. And a lot of times, okay, so there's still a lot of work to be done in that area. We at the Ability Center, we advocate for increased transportation services all the time. And to be honest, part of what's standing in the way is community support for that. There's a lack of an awareness throughout, our local community, even our state community, about how crucial that is for folks with disabilities. There's this tendency for folks to think, oh, it's just folks with disabilities are taken care of, but that's not the way it works. The community has to provide that service for folks who need it in order for them to remain independent. I think the questions about what transportation will look like in 20 years are really interesting, but I'm also finding that folks with disabilities have to get in on the ground floor to try and structure that. I think autonomous vehicles could be a revolution for folks with disabilities, but we have to make sure that they're affordable, and that public transit doesn't go away because people think that autonomous vehicles are just around to take care of other folks. So we need to make sure that folks with disabilities are able to use those vehicles, that it doesn't require a driver's license with, for example, a test of your vision. So I think transportation, with technology, there could be a huge revolution in transportation for folks with disabilities, but we're still fighting for what that looks like. So hopefully in 20 years, that's something that can really support people to be as independent as possible. But we need to make sure it looks the right way.
I know I talked about the smart home, but what I didn't talk about is I think other technologies, like I have this big idea that there will be some kind of a robot, I don't know what you want to call it, but something that you can work with your voice that can help you in and out of bed, like get you in the shower. That way you can be more independent and less dependent on other people coming in the home. And I think that's possible. I really think it's possible. I don't know about in 20 years, but I think it's the future.
Well, and I think you bring up a great point in that last thing you said. I think is so interesting when talking about technology, because we have a propensity, when we think about technology, we think, where was technology 20 years ago? And, but the problem is that technology is an exponential growth. It goes so much faster. So, I mean, you think about 20 years from now, technologically speaking, probably feels like 40 to 50 to 60 years in other ways of advancement, right? So while I hear that point, it may not be 20 years for an assistive robot type, invention. At the same time, I wonder what third grader, is right now going to be the one to invent that, as right out of high school, and they're building it in their garage right now, which sounds a little spooky, perhaps, but still fun to think about. So, all right, I keep wanting to chime in, but I'm the moderator here.
May I add something? This is Shannon. May I
sorry.
add
Yes.
Yes, we were talking about technology. One part that we were talking about is telecommunications. That's in the law. And when that was passed, finally, we have something that's called text relay service. That's a phone where people with hearing loss and people who can't speak and use their voice can use that to make phone calls. That was the text relay service. That was very nice. That was a good start. That was accessibility for people who cannot use the regular phone system. But as you were saying, technology does change over time. And deaf and hard of hearing people finally got video relay service. We struggle, for people who struggle with English as their second language, so they have access to see a person signing on the screen. An interpreter will voice interpret for us, and that's been an incredible improvement for us, and it continues to get better because now we have access through our iPhones, through our phones. We can make phone calls using American Sign Language and having an interpreter on the other end, and that still needs to get better. It's still in the works right now. So we have video relay, and then we have video remote interpreting, and you can have an interpreter on an iPad for medical appointments or any other type of meeting that you might have where an interpreter physically can't be there. The problem is many times the internet is not reliable and the picture can be fuzzy. So we're trying to improve that. And also in the future, you know, we make appointments right now for interpreters, and it's sometimes hard to find interpreters last minute. So hopefully in the future, we'll have the perfect opportunity to just have an interpreter on demand, and it will make access to communication real time. For example, with captions or local news, they tend to have the captions, but they try to set it up ahead of time. So if the weatherman's telling a story about the weather, he's talking about that, it's not on script. So there are no captions for that because it's already set in the script for the captions, and the captions go very fast and you miss what's being said. But if there's a major news station or a weather report or some type of thing on CNN, they tend to have captioning, and it's good for a last minute thing for 24/7. But locally, it's not. They think about how many people live in the metropolitan area, and based on that, they determine whether it should be live or not. But in 20 years, the technology will so the technology will eliminate those barriers that deaf and hard of hearing people have who can't speak. They can finally have real time and quick access.
I love that point. It strikes me how the conversation around internet as a public utility is going to be an unbelievably important topic. But I won't get into that anymore, I promise. Okay, so let's go to, I'm gonna kind of flip away from this, really specific and technological type conversation. And I wanna ask, how has the ADA changed the culture and attitudes toward people with disabilities? We touched on this a little bit. And how do you think that might continue to improve? And how might the attitudes toward people with disabilities and the culture change in the next 20 years at ADA 50? How might that feel and be different? Katina, I'm curious if you want to kick us off here.
Sure. So I think, originally the ADA, finally gave those with disabilities a voice, and some support and measures of action that could actually be put in place to really get the supports that they needed to be independent, to have, a great quality of life, which we all are entitled to, right? Obviously, there's still work to be done. There's still services and, that are not meeting everybody's needs. People don't have access to the correct services. But I also think, we are seeing people now value what everybody brings to the table. And it's not, I think the other part of this is, with all of the stuff going on with COVID, we've gotten really creative about doing different things too. So while, this has been a really trying time, I do think that we're coming up with really unique ways of doing things. And so, moving forward, I think, people are working together in different ways. We're seeing even with, with autism, again, technology, there's apps that they can use to now communicate. We can do services through Telemed if we have to. So, there's still just, a lot of things, I think, going forward. And I think everybody's realizing just that it's not something that has to be mandated. Everybody is entitled to a really great quality of life. And the community's better when we include people and when we give everyone opportunities and when we value the diversity and everything that it brings. It's not just better for the people with disabilities, it's better for everyone. My kids are in a better place in this world because they go to school with people that are different than them, and they have different, you know, thoughts and different challenges and different needs. So I think we're really starting to see that, and it's an easier story to tell now. I think 20 years ago, a lot of families, at least the ones that I know of, were really hesitant to talk about like their struggles and their challenges because there was such a stigma around everything. And now, you know, from what we've experienced, the tone has completely shifted. It's no longer, you know, how do we fix, you know, these people? It's now, how do we give everyone the quality of life that everybody deserves? And so I really am seeing kind of the shift in the way we talk about things, and then the way we do things and the way we serve people. And again, it doesn't just make it better for those that we serve, but for everyone. I mean, the programs that we create and the things that we do around, you know, kids with autism, or, you know, creating jobs for them or college opportunities, it's literally better for every student, for every young adult. I mean, everyone can benefit from these things. And so when you start putting in thoughts like that, you know, everything that you're creating is really better by universal design for the entire community. There's no reason not to do these things. So I guess that's what I would kind of, you know, share.
Yeah, thank you. Who else wants to think about some of the culture change and attitudinal different, you know, improvements that we might see 20 years from now?
What I would hope is that the ADA was a stepping stone that we needed to free people with disabilities, so they could get out in the community, so they could rub elbows with other people. And what I hope is eventually these things will be natural. The ADA will always be in the background, but we won't need to use it as much as we do now, because all these things will just be integrated into society, and people won't even think about it at all. Oh, we're gonna build a house? Of course we have one entrance with no steps. That's not even a debate, it's just the way you do it. So, and I really think that will be, hopefully, eventually, maybe not in 20 years, but eventually I hope the legacy of the ADA is that it brought people with disabilities out, and once they got out, everybody saw the value in them, and so they automatically incorporate these things into the infrastructure of society.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with both of the speakers. I think, you know, 30, 40 years ago, it wasn't unusual for a person with a disability to spend their whole life in an institutional setting. And then the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. It required the most integrated setting appropriate for folks. The IDEA was passed, which required schools to modify their curriculum for kids with disabilities so they could be in the least restrictive setting. So all of that integration has sort of slowly been trickling down. I think in our policy work, we're seeing a lot more understanding of disabilities and folks with disabilities from sort of both sides of the spectrum. So there are more and more people who had folks with disabilities in their classroom, who maybe disability isn't so scary for them anymore. They have a better understanding of needs and of meeting someone where they are. On the other end of it, we have an aging population that's accelerating a lot of things. So maybe there are also people that we approach who have aging family members who have developed a disability and need services or need things to be designed a certain way. I think that the ADA, the IDEA, and then also the fact that people are living longer is ushering in sort of a new cultural understanding of disability. It's making our work, our policy work, a lot easier.
Great. Anyone else want to chime in on that one, or we can keep moving? Sure, Shannon.
One thing that I've seen as well, currently many people are frustrated with hearing loss. People who don't have hearing loss have family or friends that have become late deafened, and they don't know what to do with them. It's not easy to get information or access. Many people have different opinions, and there's experts and specialists, and there are people who work in the system, and within education, you have IDEA people, you have the deaf community that's not impressed with IDEA because the kids lose access to their peers, their social skills. I've seen some of that with some of the changes that are taking place, because that includes deaf people and deafblind people. They're struggling with that because it's not only the best, it's not always the best fit. If people's attitudes change, they say, okay, let's open up, you can come, but it's not really a good fit for all individuals. It's more open. You know, you have to follow, they're saying it's more strict, you have to follow the steps, and no, really, it's more gray. You have to see what fits best for each individual, and everyone is unique, and you have to find what fits their needs. The family and friends feel, oh, I know how to help someone, you know, where to get the information, and the people hearing loss feel more integrated, and they feel better, and they feel more confident. So I've seen, we can see a lot of improvement with that, starting with that.
That's great. Thank you. Let's go into the next question. And we got a couple questions that I think will probably take us all the way home. We're almost there, because these are big questions, and I'm sure I want to hear what all of the panelists think about this. So let's talk about community partners, right? So we've kind of hit on this in a lot of different ways. Everyone here knows that the Ability Center is all in on creating more community partnerships. It is, in fact, my job to be focused on this, and you know, we understand community partnerships, you know, within the context of creating a more disability-friendly community. I think this community and this world we're envisioning in 20 years does not happen without invested community partners who see the value that so many of you have described so well. So how do you think our work, you know, each of us kind of, there's a few different disability organizations represented here. There's many more out in the community, obviously. How do you think community partnerships play a role in this future that we're describing? What might you see there? I know that's a big open-ended question, but how could they improve? How could new programs be imagined? What do you think about community partners in this conversation?
I think that community partnerships help other agencies to know what we all do. First off, we've been working with Legal Aid and ABLE, Jenna Cross, and some of these, it's just been enlightening to learn what everyone does, right? There's how many of our agencies in the city of Toledo or in our surrounding area, and to understand what everyone does. And if we had one, I feel like what we need is one spoke, right? Like, say, the Ability Center. Somebody has a disability, they call the Ability Center because they know. And then this great, you have all the resources, and you can send them to the agency that you know will help them the most. based on what their needs are. I think that the more we all know about each other, those resources, those connections are the things that can make it so much better for our community. We serve 18 counties in Northwest Ohio. Someone, once you get out to Williams County, has no idea who we are because we're not physically there. We need some type of navigator, I think, and if we could do that as a partnership with all of our agencies, I think it could be incredible for everybody.
The rest, go ahead, Shannon.
One thing I've recognized is that there are many of us who really have similar goals. And we could fully integrate into the community, to help people fully integrate into the community and become independent. That is a major goal. If we work together, wow, we could really help so many people. And also, obviously, all of us here, we're experts in our field, you know, deafness, hearing loss, vision related, different fields within the realm of disability. Especially of those with hearing loss, I have the best relationship with community centers that could help us a lot more, because deaf people and people with hearing loss are mostly overlooked as having a disability. They can't tell us that we're deaf. They can't see anything about us. It's an invisible disability. So because of that, the deaf community and those with hearing loss, late deafened individuals, it's really hard to find the revenue to provide the support, because many of the other disabilities have had fabulous support and they've gotten those funds. But if we've been struggling a lot to get the similar type of funding. So I can see us helping each other on an equal playing field, and we could really provide the best services imaginable. Like you were saying, people in Williams County don't know about our services that we have here. Same with other people. We serve people in Allen County, but they don't know that we're here. They should use our services. So together, I think we could hit on everything and provide, we could provide what's needed, especially if we all band together with the resources, the funding, everything.
Yeah, for me too, obviously, you know, no one organization can meet the needs of all of the people that we serve. So, you know, having those community partnerships is just invaluable. There's just no other way to do this work. And I also think, you know, I've valued so much learning from other organizations, what they've done over the years, what has worked well for them, what has been their challenges, you know, some of their struggles. Because I think the other thing, you know, sharing that information helps us all do things better in a more efficient way. There's no need for any of us to recreate the wheel if another organization has done that. But if you look at, you know, everything that goes on in a person's life, and when we're looking at, you know, challenges of a disability, you know, you've got, you know, early services, you have education, you have housing, unemployment, or employment, transportation, all of these different issues, and no one organization can meet the needs in all of those different areas. So it's critical that we do work together and we do share information, you know, to meet the needs, because, you know, I might work with people with autism, and some people work with people with vision issues and hearing issues or whatever else. But, you know, there might be somebody in transportation that can help all of us, but without those partnerships, you know, we just won't know that, and we're kind of siloed. And so I think, again, one of the positives that I've seen lately in Toledo, you know, historically, we've not worked well together. I mean, if you would have talked to us 20 years ago, we probably wouldn't be having these conversations between all of us, right? We just worked, we were in a tunnel vision. We worked within our silo. But now I think you are seeing partnerships form that would never have formed 20 years ago. So I do think we're in a really good place. And I think we all are kind of seeing the value of those community partnerships, that we can't do it without that critical piece.
So Sam, when you talk about community partnerships, I don't only envision partnerships with other organizations that work specifically with disability. I picture it as inclusive, whether it's the Building Association, or just anybody out there. I think the value in it is not necessarily to create services, but create more understanding of disability. So when someone comes to them, they know how to accommodate them without having to go through, oh my God, what am I gonna do? I have someone with a disability that will walk through my door. It will be because they partnered with the very center to get better education. So the very center isn't doing all the work anymore. The community is doing that work because they know how.
I love that you brought up the external. I mean, I think the community partnership conversation certainly applies, to the folks on this screen. I mean, our panelists represent so many opportunities, right? But Renee, I love that you kind of took us in a slightly different direction, but an important one, which is you think about anyone out in the community, any company or organization in housing and transportation and education and employment, anyone working on these things. I mean, so you think about in our all the housing organizations locally, are they thinking about the issues that we're thinking about day in and day out as part of their issues? You think about the people addressing employment in our community. Are they thinking about the issues that we're thinking about day in and day out as part of their work? So yeah, I love that you brought that up. Katie, I had to sneak in here because I was afraid you might say what I wanted to say next. So if I stole your answer, I apologize. What do you think about the partnership idea? Anything?
About partnerships?
Yeah.
I think so. I think that my experience at the Ability Center has been that even though we all have diverse communities with different issues, and you can kind of see that when you look at the ADA, because I have never seen a civil rights law quite so broad and all-encompassing. Sometimes I think it's kind of amazing that disability activists were able to get it passed. It has to cover so many different issues, but even though each agency has different individualized issues, there are some common themes that are important to all of us. And you see that in the ADA and the IDEA and the Fair Housing Act, all the civil rights laws that affect folks with disabilities as well. I mean, when we do policy work, more and more we've been trying to ensure that we're reaching out to other communities to make sure we get as diverse of a perspective as we can, and ensure that we're trying to meet all the needs. And a lot of the issues, I mean, the large overarching issues are in the same areas and the same categories. They're just a little bit different based on who you're speaking with. Access to, like we've been talking about, access to healthcare, access to housing, access to transportation, access to the larger community. And those issues are all sort of unite the different agencies. The more and more I am at the Ability Center, also the more I see cooperation. And I can say it's a lot more powerful to send a sign-on letter with 12 unique representative organizations than it is with one. So I think that there's lots of opportunity for partnerships. Obviously, my focus is in advocacy. So definitely in the advocacy realm. And I've enjoyed working with, almost all the organizations represented here. So.
Thank you. So I have one quick question that came up on the Facebook thread that I want to address really quickly, and then we'll get into our wrap-up question and try to finish this up. So Colleen asked, does Telemed allow for an interpreter on screen? And I think I'm gonna ask Shannon that question for sure, but I do want to just plug that we did in June, we actually did a telehealth webinar, and we had someone come on and just kind of dive into the ins and outs of what telehealth is, if people weren't all that familiar with it or had some questions about how it works. But specifically, Shannon, do you want to answer that for me?
How do you use the interpreter on the screen? Could you ask the question again, what that was
exactly? Yes, it says, does Telemed, so telehealth services, allow for an interpreter on screen?
Yes. Typically, you can use a platform like Zoom or any other platform that will allow you to have yourself, the interpreter, and the medical professional or any other person that will be on that screen. And it is possible. And you can also include captions as well. So yes, it is possible, definitely available, and it's really nice. And again, you have to make sure that the internet connection is strong and clear. Otherwise, it's not as powerful.
One, I think that it ties back into what you were saying earlier, Shannon, that so much of the future of accessibility and inclusion is really just improving some of these first steps that we're taking. I mean, we're just scratching the surface of what all of this technology is capable of, and fully integrating that into a healthcare system can be an enormously challenging task. But yeah, I'm glad that came up. So, last question: as we think about, the original, and Katie, you just hit on this, how expansive the ADA is, and how, I think it was wasn't there a quote from Senator Kennedy who said, he made a joke like, at the signing, I really hope they don't read what's actually in the law. You remember that? Just such a funny.
There were a lot of compromises in the law too. I mean,
sure, but it's just
we'll recognize that.
Right. It's a funny joke that I think hits at the larger point, right? And so, but as you think about the folks who advocated for this, and they were in a specific moment trying to, change the world, quite frankly, and change the reality for so many people. Let's now, we have the advantage of being 30 years later. Let's think about some of the issues that couldn't have possibly been in their minds. And we've already hit on some of the technology pieces, and we might drift that way again, and that's okay. But think about the needs of, Katina, I think about the needs that you're thinking about day in and day out, and how, the needs of folks with autism weren't as centered in that conversation. How could it have been? It's such an emerging thing over the last 30 years. And what other issues, though, and I might slightly change the question to say, what if you were drafting the ADA right now, today, and then think about what does the next 20 years call for, that the original framers and architects of this legislation could have possibly never been thinking about. If you were writing it now, what would you focus on? And we're running short on time, so this will be the last question. Fire away, people.
I would say funding. I think funding is still a huge issue. The laws are there, but without the funding, it really doesn't matter. I think we see that all over the place. If the funding were available, I think our challenges would not be what we see them to be today.
I
Yeah,
think,
Shannon. No, sorry. Go ahead, Renee.
I think it would be more, more immediate enforcement. Cause if you go to a job interview and you know you were discriminated against, are you gonna spend a year in court or a year trying to get that rectified? Or are you just gonna move on and say, no? So there needs to be some more of a mechanism that can really impact the laws that are already there. And I'm trying to think about what the ADA doesn't cover, because it's so bad, it's so encompassing of everything.
Yeah, the more immediate enforcement it's a super interesting way to go. I think Shannon, you were going to go next.
Yes. If we had to write the law again, I think it would be very crucial to get the experts brought in and involved in the actual writing and drafting of the law. You need education experts, communication specialists, everything. You get the experts and the masters in the different fields, and you can breathe life into the law. And I agree with the financial part and the immediate enforcement as well. You know, who reviews this? It seems like the same concerns and the issues often happen, but more, we want to make sure that people, the more free and independent people can be.
Katie?
Yeah, so I guess just off the cusp, sort of three things come to mind. So I mean, even though you already had a question on this, there are some technical parts of the ADA that need to be updated with technology. So like, for example, we see that with, there are larger wheelchairs now, partly because they are electric, or a lot of people have electric wheelchairs, and some of the standards don't quite, like the doors aren't quite wide enough, you know, stuff like that. And smartphones have changed a lot. I would say a stronger integration mandate. The Supreme Court did support the integration mandate, obviously, and there's been some strong enforcement, but they gave a little wiggle room to the states, partially because I think the Olmstead decision was in 1990, which again, you know, times have changed. A lot of national disability groups are suggesting a new act called the Disability Integration Act, which would make integration the standard, rather than the balancing test that came out of the Supreme Court decision, which has given states just a little bit of wiggle room. I guess the last thing, and this may not be a popular answer, but sometimes it's hard to get attorneys interested in the ADA, especially Title III, because it only provides injunctive relief. So I think if there were damages available for private enforcement, that a lot more attorneys would get involved in enforcing it, and we would see a lot of change very fast. So those are, just off the top of my head, I guess, three things I'd like to see in terms of changes to the law itself.
Yeah. Stacey, do you want to offer your thoughts in addition to that?
I think it was pretty much covered, and I have to agree with funding. I think that, you know, our biggest struggle is being able to serve the people that need it, keeping folks so that they can be independent. And if you're a 35-year-old homemaker and you lose all your vision, there's no funding to help you. And I think there are some sorely lacking areas that I would really like to see fixed.
Well, my clock has us right at 11 o'clock. So let me just say, that we did it. We covered 20 years in 60 minutes, and that is incredibly impressive. I'm kind of joking, but really this conversation has been so interesting and encouraging and exciting to me. So thank you to all of the panelists for being a part of this, to everyone participating and watching on Facebook and on this exact Zoom call right now. Thank you for participating. We're going to archive this on our website so you can share it around, and I encourage you to do so. And we're not going to take up any more of your time. So panelists, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.